On June 22, 1941, German troops crossed the Soviet border, kicking off one of the largest military operations in history, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. This was the long-awaited German invasion of the USSR, an event that many believed would finally bring about a Nazi victory. What went wrong? It's me. This is a World War II special episode about Operation Barbarossa, the failure of Nazi Germany's invasion of the USSR. It's fair to say that few military operations have generated as much literature, film, music, and general public interest than D-Day. Yet when it comes to the other great battle of 1941, the German invasion of the USSR, popularly known as Operation Barbarossa, we are all mostly in the dark. Despite the fact that this battle involved more troops and had a greater impact on the outcome of the war than D-Day ever did, it still has not received anywhere near as much attention. But why? Well, the first reason is probably the most obvious. Unlike D-Day, which was a magnificent Allied victory, Barbarossa was a colossal failure for the Germans, and while there is probably no shortage of people out there willing to analyze the mistakes made by Allied commanders, there are very few people willing to make excuses for Hitler. The second reason is probably that the D-Day landings happened in France, an iconic location right here in Western Europe. Meanwhile, the German invasion of the USSR started in Russia, a place most Western Europeans either never visit or only pass through on their way to Disneyland. In my case, however, the story of Barbarossa is deeply personal because I am from Russia. My parents were born and raised in Moscow, and my grandmother was evacuated from the city when it was about to fall to the Nazis. That's why I decided to dedicate this channel's special episode to the failure of Barbarossa. But what exactly was Operation Barbarossa? Operation Barbarossa was the code name for the joint German, Italian, and Romanian invasion of the Soviet Union. While Barbarossa is often treated as the single largest military operation in history, it was actually two operations in one. The first part of the plan was the invasion of the USSR itself. This was designed to be a lightning strike deep into Soviet territory. The goal was to reach the key oil fields of the Caucasus, without getting bogged down in a prolonged campaign in Ukraine. To accomplish this, the German army would have to race across the vast East European plain in just a couple of months. If successful, the bulk of the Red Army would be destroyed, the Soviet leadership deposed, and the country forced to sue for peace. In that case, Germany would find itself at war with Britain alone. The second part of the plan was the conquest of the rest of the Soviet Union. As soon as Moscow fell, the Japanese would declare war on the USSR and begin their long-awaited invasion of Siberia. In the meantime, Finland would also join the Germans, taking the city of Leningrad and pushing along the Arctic coast. Finally, the Italians would march south along the Black Sea coast. Although this plan sounds pretty insane even by 1940s standards, it was actually quite similar to the German strategy against Poland, Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war. The German army entered the USSR on June 22, 1941, 2 days after the French surrendered. Over the next 3 weeks, they achieved complete surprise and made tremendous progress. The Soviets were caught completely off guard, and the Red Army's initial resistance was negligible. By mid-July, the Germans controlled all of eastern Poland, Belarus, and the Baltic states. They had advanced over 200 miles into Soviet territory. And although they had fought against partisans who conducted guerrilla warfare tactics, there had been almost no large-scale engagements. At this point, everything was going perfectly for the Germans. But from here on, their path to victory would become increasingly difficult. The first major setback came with the Battle of Smolensk. Here, the Germans encountered their first sizable Red Army units. And because their supply lines were so stretched, the Germans found themselves fighting multiple battles simultaneously. Unable to break through the Soviet defenses, Hitler decided to regroup his forces and launch a new offensive from the center. The objective was the city of Bryansk, located 186 miles from Moscow. However, before the Germans could get there, the Soviets launched a counterattack and forced them to retreat. By September, the entire German army had to pull back to its previous positions. Hitler was furious. He blamed everyone but himself, and in a fit of rage, he ordered Operation Typhoon, a massive artillery barrage of Soviet positions. On October, the Germans went on the offensive once again. But for the first time since the start of the war, they had to contend with a well-prepared enemy. Not only were the Russians ready for the attack, but they had also dug in and mined large parts of the terrain. All of this meant that the German advance slowed dramatically. Within just 2 weeks, the Germans advanced less than 30 miles. They had taken heavy casualties and their momentum was broken. After realizing that he would never be able to achieve his original goals, Hitler ordered the Germans to dig in and prepare for a winter campaign. During the winter of 1941-42, the Germans pushed forward a little bit. But the real fighting didn't resume until April. And as soon as the snow melted, the Russians launched another counterattack. This time their goal was the city of Kharkiv. Once again, the Germans had to abandon their positions and flee westward. By May, the whole German army had retreated all the way back to their starting positions. Barbarossa was effectively a failure. But Hitler refused to admit it. He wanted to buy some time before launching a final decisive push, so he decided to invade Turkey. This, of course, backfired spectacularly. The British and the Soviets took advantage of the German preoccupation to launch massive offensives. Within just a few weeks, the Germans had lost all of the territories they had conquered in the summer of 1941. By October, they had retreated all the way to the Dnieper River. There they dug in and prepared for the inevitable Soviet push into the heartland of Russia. Despite being far behind enemy lines, the Germans managed to hold on until Christmas, but at terrible cost. Half of their men were dead, most of their equipment was destroyed, and they had no hope of receiving reinforcements. With morale plummeting, the German officers decided to surrender. On Christmas Day 1943, they laid down their weapons and joined the Soviets as prisoners of war. Today, only 38 men remain alive. Among them is Joseph, appeared on this channel several times. His story was covered in a previous video. So why did Barbarossa fail? Well, first of all, the German army was exhausted by the fighting on the Western Front. Most of the men had been in combat for nearly 3 years, and despite the advances they made, their resources were stretched thin. This led to a shortage of ammunition, fuel, and food. Second, the German high command underestimated the Soviet Union. They believed that the Russians would collapse in a matter of weeks. But the sheer size of the country and the amount of manpower it could mobilize proved to be a game changer. In fact, Stalin turned the Wehrmacht's desire to quickly capture Moscow against them, luring them deep into Russian territory where they got bogged down. Third, unlike the countries they had previously invaded, the Soviet Union had a lot of friends. As soon as the Germans attacked, the British, Americans, Poles, Romanians, and Finns joined the fight. All of these factors combined meant that the German war machine eventually ground to a halt. Exhausted and demoralized, the Germans were simply unable to wage war in the East anymore. And this is why Barbarossa is one of the biggest what-if moments in history. Had the Germans managed to advance to the Caucasus, they might have actually stood a chance at winning the war. But as it stands, this will never be known. What do you think? Do you think the German invasion of the USSR could have been successful? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, please share it and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.